Hi, I'm Philip. Unfortunately, my French is very poor, or I've mostly forgotten my French from school. So it is better for everybody if I speak English. I will try not to be too fast. If I'm kind of not easy to understand, just stop me and I'll try to slow down. So I want to talk about our Docker images and kind of the ongoing battle that we have with our Docker images. And yeah, I've already been kind of introduced. I was part of our infrastructure team, or I've been moved around various teams. And I always say this is a Unix pipe. I kind of piped it out into developer advocacy. So what David is doing for Elasticsearch, I was more on the ops or infrastructure side internally. And that's why I came to talk about this topic in general. So just to get an idea, who is using Docker here? Okay, that's a good number. Who is using Docker in production? Okay, that's fewer, but still a few. That's good. Who is using stateful Docker images, like any database or anything in Docker? It's like, okay, few half hands or something like that. Okay, yeah, that's a common picture we see that people, for development it's nice, for production, for stateless stuff it's nice. For stateful stuff it can be a bit tricky. We try to provide production grade images, but there are various problems around them. That's kind of where we want to dive into. Who's using our images? Or who thinks they are using our images? Okay, because this is sometimes confusing. Maybe you will see that you're actually not using our images, but we will get to that. We have this internal saying, or at some point our colleague said, Docker is the world's most heavily funded college project, because we ran into so many issues and little or larger problems around it. And it's kind of amazing how people are using it in production. And yeah, we saw like a lot of terrible things. And it's an ongoing battle, like I said. So I generally think this is the right Docker logo, by the way. So we are the little Nemo fish, and this is Docker. And this is also the size of most of your Docker containers, probably, that you have something of this size more. So what I want to dive into is, what does official even mean? What are our base images based on? Our release policy, a bit around security, support, and finally orchestration. So what does official mean? What do you get if you run this command? Docker pull Elasticsearch. What do you get?
An obsolete version?
Yes, that is true. Is that obsolete version coming from us? Yes, you get the latest tag, that is true, though the latest tag in that case is still outdated, and we are not involved in that, and we have never been involved with that. And if you're using these images, you're not using our images. So if anybody is using that, yeah, pay attention, because this is kind of the thing that most people do when they get started is they do Docker pull whatever they want, and then they get something, but that something is kind of not always that straightforward, because that is the website for that image. And you can see it says Elasticsearch, and you can see up there it says official repository. Only what is official is weird. And then you have this thing here. You have a deprecation notice. And it's kind of like, this is a very weird combination. Probably it's not 9 days anymore, because I took that screenshot some time ago. But this is kind of a weird thing, because it's official, but it's deprecated. What is going on here? It is official, but it's Docker Inc. official, and it's not Elastic Inc. official, or Elastic BV, or whatever the company behind it is. So this is provided by Docker, the company, and they created that and said, oh, this is an official image we created. But since we produced the software, we were never involved in that, which is kind of tricky. And at some point we said, well, we're happy to take that over, and they were kind enough to say, yeah, that might be a good idea. But the way they're building these images, we cannot do that. That's why we had to deprecate this, and we use our own registry. So if you want to get our images, our registry is at docker.elastic.co, and that is the registry where we are hosting our stuff. Any opinions on private registries versus Docker Hub? Good, bad, doesn't matter. For most people, it doesn't matter, though some people seem to have very strong opinions about that. We generally think that providing your own container registry is fine. Like that is Jess, she's very big in the container space. And that especially since our own cloud service is depending on Docker images, we always needed to have fast access and kind of always available access to Docker images. That's why we, at some point, were not that happy with what Docker Hub is providing, and then we started using our own Docker registry. So we have another motivation as well. We like to get download statistics. So we could look up how many people from France, based on the geo-IP lookup, have downloaded Elasticsearch, for example, and which specific versions. And that is kind of a very important driver for marketing, but also for the product development, to see where do we have activity, which products are being downloaded, which versions, and normally want to get all of these statistics, which we get if you take like the regular downloads we have, if you take the debian package, the RPM, the targset, I think we have an MSI now. So if you get any of these, we control the download, and then we get a lot of statistics. And also we like to brag about X million people have downloaded our software. And I think we're like, what are we, 200 million, 200 plus million or something like that. And since a lot of people are using Docker images, we don't want to lose those numbers. Kind of a side effect. But we generally like to get these statistics. And if you're using Docker Hub, you don't get them. And the other thing is speed and reliability. Well, since our cloud offering depends on that, and sometimes we kind of felt it wasn't that great, we wanted to do that. So that's why we started our own registry, which has a front end as well, which might look a bit cleaner than what Docker Hub gives you. So you can see all the versions. Basically, you can see we have different basic. We have a basic image. Below that, we would have. You can see we have an open source image. We have expec below. So we have all the images there in pretty much all the versions we have ever done. Any guesses where you could reach that front end? It took us some time internally where to put that, and well, since the registry is docker.elastic.co, this one is www.docker.elastic.co. Though we had various variations of that, and it took us some time to figure out that this is probably the best place. We thought about getting rid of that www. But like the way we're handling requests, that was not that stable, and then sometimes we could not determine if is it a browser just trying to browse something, or is it somebody trying to download the images. So we have split those up. But generally, if you want to see all the images that we are providing, this is the address where you can see that. And then it's probably hard to see, but you have like these little link icons, and then you can just copy the command to do a Docker pull on that directly, and then you can just use them. Why are people not that happy about that sometimes? Some tooling assumes that you're using Docker Hub. Like there's Kitematic, and some have like automated builds, and those really want to use Docker Hub. And sometimes that's a problem. The next one was less obvious to us in Europe and in the US is China, because the Great Firewall of China blocks a lot of stuff, including private Docker registries like ours. But Docker Hub has an official mirror in China. And that's how people got around that. And then we thought at first, well, we'll just host a server and provide a mirror there ourselves. But that is not that easy. If you want to provide any services or servers or anything like that in China, you need to have a legal entity. And then you need to start a legal entity. By now we have a legal entity, but this is all like a complicated process. And the final concern or problem that some people run into is that we are on a cloud provider right now that does not support IP version 6 everywhere that well. And our registry does not handle IP version 6 right now. So if you have a bridge to IP version 4, you're fine. If you're just on IP version 4, that's also fine. If you're only doing IP version 6, you will run into some errors when trying to get our images. Yeah, probably our cloud providers stick to selling books and not doing other stuff. That's, but yeah, IP version 6 is like an ongoing problem there, and we might migrate away at some point. But we have also mirrored those now to Docker Hub, just exactly for these reasons. So it's not the Docker pull Elastic image, but we have a user account Elastic, and then you have all the images that we push. And we will push, as soon as we release, we will push there as well. And basically you have the URL, so you have hub.docker.com/r/elastic, and then you have all the products that we do. So the star beat is file beat, packet beat, metric beat, audit beat, whatever you have. We even have a new APM server. There is a Docker image for that as well. So if you don't want to use our registry, but for some reason need to use Docker Hub, this is where you can get the same stuff from Docker Hub. So we try to help you out on that. So for example, if you're just on IP version 6, this is your workaround.
But then we don't have the statistics, right?
But then we don't have the statistics. It's kind of a trade-off. But I think the idea was we might give up some statistics in order to serve more images, even though we always would try to have you on our registry. And I think we have been discussing with Docker Inc. if we maybe could get statistics out of that. But I think this is one of these long-running to-dos, and we'll see at some point. OK, base images. Any strong feelings about base images? Who is always using the same base image for everything and rebuilding it themselves? OK, what are you using? Ubuntu. Ubuntu? OK. Yeah, people also have very strong opinions about base images. So initially, for Elasticsearch, we started with Alpine because that is what, at least 2 years ago, so everybody said like, oh, Alpine, 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 it's small, everybody should use that, it's the future of all Docker images. The problem was we got that to work for Elasticsearch, but for Beats, Kibana, and Logstash, we always used Ubuntu images. I think for Logstash, it's because JRuby is not supported on Alpine, and it's based on JRuby. And from what I remember, Node was at least 1 or 1.5 years ago not officially supported on Alpine as well. And we were like, if we provide official images, we kind of need something that supports it all the way down. And we cannot just say like, oh, we'll just slap the official logo on that and then try to support it ourselves. So we always had this split in the images. So some were Alpine and the others were Ubuntu. And then the other problem was machine learning appeared at some point. And machine learning has a C++ component, and that C++ component does not work on Alpine. And then there was the discussion like, should we invest like, I don't know, a few weeks of engineering time to make that work on Alpine the right way? And it was decided maybe that's not the best investment since we have these multiple images anyway. So what did we do in the end? We switched images. Which image are we using now? Indeed, we are. We are using CentOS 7 since 5.4, so that was the change there. Since 5.4, all our images are based on CentOS. Any guesses why? Because some people have very strong opinions on base images, and some of our biggest customers are in the US, and they generally have this Red Hat affinity. And so the closest thing we have to offer there is CentOS, so everything right now is standardized on CentOS. Though normally if you really want to use one specific base image, you probably should build it yourself anyway. But yeah, this is the default that we're using now. So what you get is, that is by the way like a link to the right place. We have a Ginger file for the Docker template, and this is kind of the most relevant section that you have. So you can see we're starting with CentOS 7. We're using currently for 6.2 still Java 8. And basically, we're installing some dependencies and then throwing in, for example, Elasticsearch. But this is the base image, and these are the layers that we're using there. So the upsides of having one shared base image is that we're sharing the layers. If you have multiple base images, well, you need to have all the base images, whereas if you have CentOS 7, for everything, you will share that base CentOS 7 layer. Also, the setup is much more similar now because, well, it's CentOS and the CentOS toolkit everywhere. Because if I remember correctly, Alpine has the package manager APK or something like that. And it's not Yum, and now everything is Yum-based, and it's kind of easier to make that work. Also, if you need the JVM, and we always want the JVM because of the additional tooling, not just the runtime environment, if you need the JVM on your image is not going to be very small anyway. So it doesn't help you if you have Alpine, and Alpine has like, I don't know, 30 megabytes or something like that, and then you add 100 megabytes for the JDK. Like, you're not winning much in the end. And we also ran into various subtle or not so subtle bugs around Alpine. That was one, for example, where we figured out that it was, I don't know, it was some specific syscall if you had a specific host operating system and more than 3 layers on the mounted file system or something like that. And only then were you running into problems. That problem was fixed, but we had the feeling we were running into more and more problems in Alpine because it was just not that widely used and battle tested, especially since it's, instead of using glibc, it's using the MUCL libc. It's more modern, it's probably smaller and probably, or maybe more secure. That is kind of debatable, but it's definitely not as battle tested. And we ran into issues around that every now and then. Main downside is that the size of our images increased quite a bit. So I pulled the various images and on the right hand side you can see the image size of how it has changed over time. So 5.3.3 was the last image where we were using Ubuntu and Alpine, and then I included the 5.67 here, but there shouldn't be many changes on the patch level, and the 6.2 releases for size. I have thrown that into a table to make it slightly more readable, and you can see for Elasticsearch it did change quite a bit from Alpine, from 165 megs to 600 or 540 depending on which version you're on. Generally we would assume that Elasticsearch and Kibana you will not deploy very often because, well, we normally release, like, I don't know, once a month or so, some patch level version. So you probably are not going to roll that out. It's not like a stateless service which you deploy 50 times a day. There, every megabyte will hurt you because, well, you roll it out loads and loads of times. Whereas stateful stuff you probably roll out once or a few times, but not that often. So the size is probably not that, doesn't have that much of an impact. For the beats, yeah, we might add smaller images at some point because these you normally run as a sidecar on all your hosts to collect your logs. And there, if you have lots of servers, that might add up over time. So there it might make sense to trim them a bit. Yeah, like I said, does it matter? For stateless stuff, probably it does matter the size because you deploy very often. For stateful stuff, maybe not that much. And then there is the open question, what do you include in your images? Since the nice thing about Docker images is you put everything in there and then anybody can just use them and you don't need to do any installation or any changes to them. So what do you throw in there? And initially we added XPack because, well, a lot of people want to use XPack or at least should have the option to try that out. But some people were not that happy, either out of principle because they just want to have open source software, or because they had to disable features explicitly and they felt like it was stupid to disable stuff and instead of just getting what they wanted. So at some point we made a change. So since 6, we have 3 different images. So we have basic, that is the default. So if you do a pull on Elasticsearch without specifying the flavor, you will get the basic license. We have a pure open source one, and we have a Platinum trial image of that as well. That is for Elasticsearch. For the beats, don't have any commercial components in there, so there is just a single one. For Kibana and Logstash, there is just basic and XPack, it's called there, because there is the license difference is only in Elasticsearch then. Yeah. Then there's the question like, what are we doing next, or what are people asking for? Smaller images, maybe, but that smaller images probably mean we will need to support multiple base images. We are kind of like, it will be a lot of work and it will be a lot of error scenarios, and we're not sure we really want to take that on. Also, which JDK version are we shipping? Since we are in 6.3, you said that in the introduction, if I understood correctly, yes. You said we will support Java 10, and right now all our images ship with JDK 8. But the current build candidate, or you can see it in the 6.3 branch on the Docker images for Elasticsearch, that one ships or will ship with OpenJDK 10 already. So there we have kind of left JDK 8, even though we support it and generally recommend it. But there we have switched to JDK 10 already. Do we want to build 2 different versions then? So we will have like open source, basic, platinum, plus JDK 8 and JDK 10. Maybe we want to do that, or maybe probably we don't want to do that. Do we want to use multiple base images? Because some people are like, oh, we want everything in Ubuntu, and others are like, oh, we want everything in CentOS, and somebody probably has some other wish. It will just be a kind of an explosion, because the more combinations you have, it will get more and more and more. And then there are people who are always asking about Windows. That one actually makes kind of sense because if you're using images, Docker images on Windows, generally you have this small virtualization layer in between. But if you're using a current version like I think Windows Server 2016, for example, and you're using a Windows image, you do not need that virtualization layer. So performance-wise, that might make sense. However, we don't have anybody on the team who uses Windows on a regular basis or who wants to support Windows. So we're a bit unsure about that. We kind of see that that one might make the most sense, but it's also the least appealing option we have.
On GitHub.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Microsoft will find a very nice solution to abstract that away for us, but I'm slightly doubtful. Yeah, how do we release? We do not have a latest tag. Why is that? And probably we get like every 1 to 2 months or so, somebody opens a GitHub issue and says like, you don't have a latest tag. Is this a bug or is this a feature?
It will change without you to know that it changed, so it's not good.
Yes, so the kind of like the problem that we anticipate is you spin up a 3-node cluster today, and in 6 months or so you want to add 2 more nodes. Maybe you will get a different major version then. And you might screw up your entire cluster, depending on what changes. Or depending on what combination of XPack or no XPack or security or whatever you have. So latest is generally something that we think should not be used anywhere, at least not anywhere near production. And we want our images to be production ready, so that's why we don't have latest. And then some people always complain and say like, oh, on Docker Hub, the default is, or the default that you're getting is latest. But kind of latest is only like there is no good solution, so it's kind of the least bad solution that they have. Since you don't specify a version, the only thing that somebody could give you is latest. That's kind of their implicit default. But for production users, it's generally not advised to have latest at all, or at least not use it. And I always say this is a zombie. That is something that should have been killed by evidence, but kind of keeps shambling along. That is like the latest tag, that people hold on to that and got very used to that and don't want to get rid of latest, even though there's normally not much of a reason to not do that. And then some people say, okay, no latest. What if you have version 5 or just version 5.6? Because I just want to have the latest patch level. But it kind of adds the same problem. Also, Elasticsearch, or more in particular, I think Lucene is kind of picky when it writes out data with a specific Lucene version. All the Lucene versions might not like that much, so then the shard created on the latest version might not be able to replicate it on another one. And generally, if you have like an important bug fix or an important feature there, you probably want that to have that on all nodes and not just some random ones. So once again, normally chaos or something unpredictable, there is too much of that in your system already. So we try to avoid adding more like randomness to your clusters. And then the question is, what's in a tag? So you can see we have version 5.3.3 here, and the bottom 2 ones are 5 months old, and the top one is 4 months old. Is that kind of weird? Because with the new stack release, we have one release process, and all the artifacts, including the Docker images by now, are being released at the same time. How come that one Docker image is newer than the others? So basically, we had a bug in there, and then we simply overwrote the existing tag. But you don't, except if you check the ID of the image, you don't have any, or you don't have any way to see that we actually updated that one. So you would need to check that explicitly. So right now we're overwriting tags when we find bugs. We do not overwrite older versions, by the way, because suddenly now you have dependencies like security in your base image or security in your JDK. And we might need to respin all the old images from, I don't know, 2 years ago. Right now, we're not doing that. We will only build new images for the future, but anything older, you're basically on your own there, security-wise. Yeah, because suddenly you have, previously we only had like our own software and its dependencies, but suddenly you have dependency tree including the operating system and the JVM as well, which is a bit unexpected and probably not what we want. We might add versioned images in the future. So you might have version 6.2.4, and then we might have, I don't know, a -0, -1, whatever to version that in case we find a bug or in case we find a security issue we need to fix quickly. We're still not sure if we really want to do that. That's something up for discussion. Yes, speaking of security, can you run Elasticsearch as root? No. What will happen if you try? Yes, it will system exit. And that was, yeah, I said these are the cockroaches. They are reappearing after some time because that not running Elasticsearch as root is a good thing was generally accepted and everybody agreed. Now that we have Docker again, some people say, well, it's in a container, it's isolated. We even had somebody on GitHub who opened an issue and said, like, for us, our practice is to run everything as root in Docker. And we really want to do that. And they were very annoyed when that we don't support that. What are your options if you want to run Elasticsearch as root? You can fork the source code and then comment out the system exit. Those are your options. And so we don't do that. We don't do that for Docker images. If you think you want to run this root, we disagree and we won't support you. Running Elasticsearch as root is not going to happen. The other thing you probably have run into are the bootstrap checks. And you know, you have this production setup where something is clusterable, or development mode where you only bind to localhost. And depending on that is in development mode, bootstrap checks will only be warnings. For production setups or production-able, cluster-able setups, we will actually stop the node and not let it come up. Which is cool in general. It's just not that great for Docker because you kind of need to get out of that Docker image and reach to the outside world. So for that, we've actually added a Docker mode. And you can set it to discovery type single node, which cannot form a cluster, but it's binding to a non-local host to get out of its container so that you can actually use it on your host, but you still cannot cluster it. So that's kind of the Docker workaround that we had to add specifically for Docker. Yeah, and the bootstrap checks are here to stay. So I actually haven't heard many complaints recently anymore. Like initially, some people were like, oh, it's, I don't know, I want to run with very few file handles or something that will cause issues later on. But I haven't heard too much about that anymore. So I don't think there are any plans to get rid of them anyway. Yes, something that is maybe not that cool for Docker images, since you want to have kind of like the pre-baked image and you don't want to touch anything anymore, is that we don't have default credentials anymore. So how do you work around that? Basically, you can pass in an environment variable with like a bootstrap password, and then you need to use the API to actually replace that with a proper user, and then that passed-in credential is not workable anymore. But stuff like that might seem a bit more cumbersome, especially since you start up an image, it does everything for you, and you don't need to change anything. With security, it's a bit harder. Also, in production use cases, I think we require expect certificates here. Now, not if you have a trial license, but if you have a production license, we will require certificates. And well, Docker images and certificates are also kind of interesting because what do? Do you kind of generate some certificate and bake it into the image, and then everybody is using the same certificate? That's kind of circumventing the point. So you will need to provide your own certificates for that. But of course, that makes the experience a bit harder because previously you did, I don't know, Docker IT or Docker Compose up or whatever, and it would just start. Now you need to think a bit more of how you want to set up security. Yeah, support. This is from the documentation. This is the most important thing that everybody should know or read. We will start Elasticsearch with the user Elasticsearch and using these credentials or these permissions. And this was not the case when we were using the Docker Inc. official images. They didn't really care about anything. They would just mutate permissions, which we think is very dirty, and we don't do that. But they were very lenient around that. And that is kind of comes back now because people expect our images to be lenient as well, but we're not. And every now and then people open issues like that, and then they say something like, I prefer simple fire and forget Docker containers. The problem is you have any data in there, simple fire and forget does not sound very good for any production use case. So while simple fire and forget might be awesome for your testing, for production we don't consider that a feature. And yeah, we do not help you with that. So yeah, we always call this the YOLO mode, basically, which looks something like this. We don't do that. We don't mutate the bind-mounted local directory, because you should never write your data into the Docker container. A, it will be very slow, and B, if you replace the Docker container, it's gone, so don't do that. So you mount or bind mount a local directory where you write your data. The old Docker Inc. official images would just change the permissions in that. So that is very dirty that you change anything on the host operating system. So we don't do that. So this folder needs to have the right permissions. If you don't have a pre-existing one, everything will be fine because we'll set it up and it will work. If you have something in there and you have not set the right permissions, your Docker image will, or our Docker image will not come up. And that is one of the main sources of complaints. Yeah, this again is one of the, I think, a zombie that don't change anything on the host from within your container, because it's just breaking your isolation. Don't do that. And yeah, people always think, oh, we'll just use Docker, and we don't need to know anything about Unix or file permissions anymore. But it's kind of the contrary. Suddenly you need to know these things again. Well, otherwise you're condemned to reinvent stuff like that, but poorly. And we see a lot of the questions around that people don't understand file permissions, for example. And they're very confused, why do I suddenly need to know about file permissions? I just want to use Docker. But just this, Docker is kind of like not the easiest system if you look a bit under the hood. Yeah, anybody knows that? Docker default values for the limit of the number of open files and the limit for the processes you can run? Yeah, it was changed to infinity. There is also one, do I need to set this up? Do I not need to set this up? There is a nice trick. You can, this is based on CentOS 7, so if you have any of our images, you have that image already, so there is nothing you will need to download. You can just run that image, run the bash command to check these limits, and at least on my Mac, these are the limits that are being set. So this is one way to check how your limits of your Docker container are set, which can be kind of handy if you want to figure out like what is actually going on in my Docker container and where do all my settings come from. Yeah, the other thing that we commonly see is people don't know Docker, people don't know Elasticsearch, and then they think we'll just combine both and it will be much better. Unfortunately, I don't want to say Elasticsearch or Docker, either one of them are complex, but both of them are not really simple systems, and you need to understand some things around them. But if you combine two more or less complex systems, you will not get awesome results unless you understand what you're doing. And we see that a lot. And the other thing is that Docker is, unfortunately, a leaky abstraction. So nobody wants to use virtual machines anymore because they are heavy and you lose performance. But unfortunately, Docker is kind of leaky, and we see that every now and then with bugs. So for example, we had that when somebody was able or ran into a bug, and then it turned out, oh, it's only happening if your host operating system is Windows, because on Linux and OS X, it's not happening. And stuff like that is a lot of fun if we need to debug that. And then the people maintaining those images need to have all the different operating systems to try out what could go wrong and what combination of things. Or for example, depending on your host operating system, your file system will be different and will have different bugs. So the abstraction is not that clean. Finally, orchestration. So who's using Kubernetes? Okay, not that many. Anybody using Swarm? Or is it maybe? Okay. Mesos? No. Nomad or anything else? No. Okay, normally what we see is at least 80% or so Kubernetes. So I would say that Kubernetes is kind of one, and Docker Inc. really tried with Swarm, but well, that failed. And even they have conceded their defeat now and are doing more about Kubernetes now. We do not provide orchestration yet. We will probably provide something for Kubernetes. I think the idea is to provide a Helm chart to do that. What we are currently doing, or in the process of doing, is to test our images for orchestration. Because depending on your orchestration system, you run into different bugs than if you are just using the plain images. So for example, Kubernetes up until 1.8 did not allow dots in environment variables, which is generally perfectly legal, and we require that for some settings, but Kubernetes simply did not allow that. And that was one of the things that was a bit frustrating for the users, and it was also unexpected for us. So even though we might not, in the short run, provide Kubernetes orchestration for you, we will try to test our images to see, like, okay, there is stuff we have to fix in the images, or we can improve in the images to make it easier for you to orchestrate. Yeah, and then there is this ongoing discussion, should you even run any stateful things in Kubernetes? And Kelsey Hightower, he's the Google developer advocate for Kubernetes. He's very well known generally. Even he's a bit careful if you should run stuff like databases and message queues in Kubernetes. And he always says that kind of like the system needs to be Kubernetes halfway, and that you as a system need to be have the right building blocks so that you can cleanly integrate that. And that integration so far is definitely not perfect. So we're always a bit cautious if that is a good idea. If you really need orchestration, we have that thing called Elastic ECE, Elastic Cloud Enterprise. Even though cloud is kind of might be slightly misleading since you can run it on your own hardware. But if you need orchestration today for that, we have built our own system which predates Kubernetes. So it's not built on any of the other orchestration systems, even though we might integrate into them in the future. But we have an orchestration solution if you need that now. So to wrap up, Docker is disrupting the industry, and internally we were always discussing if this is kind of a good thing or a bad thing, that as disrupting as in failing and disrupting your services might be the answer, or it might just be what everybody uses now. So our opinion on that is pretty much like, if Docker is like the new zip format and that is how you want to get your software, we will totally support that. Then the next question is, can I run Elasticsearch on Docker? Yes, you can. The other question is, that might be more tricky, is should I run Elasticsearch on Docker? And you know, what is the answer to everything when you ask us? It depends, exactly. So for development, for example, yes, I run all my demos on Docker. For production, I would be a bit more cautious. Maybe not, depending on how much Docker experience you have and how you feel about that. If you don't have much experience, I would not start with your stateful services to put them in a container and try to run that, because that might not end that well. Yeah, managing state is hard. And if you have that in the same cluster and you have some issues in your cluster also around security or upgrades, stuff will become much harder. So we're not saying you should not do that. You should just think about having stuff like stateful services mixed up with the rest of your services. Might not always be the cleanest solution. Just as a thought. Questions? Or thank you.